Okay, so this is the landing page for CDAT. You do need to log in to use the tool, and you do need to have approval to have access to the tool. That information is in the PDF you can download in the handout section. If you need more information on that, you can certainly contact us as well. But once you've registered for an account, basically it'll kick an email off to some folks at KTC and folks at KYTC. We check to see that you have approval to use the tool, assigned MOU and things. And then I usually set you up at either basic or advanced, and then send you a note saying you can use the tool. So just registering for an account doesn't get you access yet. There is a demo version of the tool that with permission from the cabinet I can provide people access to. And that's people who don't have a signed MOU, but they just want to try the tool, and all the data is anonymized, so you can't actually look at real data, but you can use the tool and just see how it works. For today, I'm logged in as a basic user, so you won't be able to see any narratives, PDFs of crash reports, names, even things like master file number and location are going to be redacted. Even though that information is available on the public site, it's our safe way of demonstrating the data so that there's no risk of anything really private getting out. And that's something we take very seriously with our crash data access. So I'm logged in as a basic user, so I may point out some of the things you don't get as a basic user. But on the landing page, the main thing is you have access to the query tool and the import tool. And you can watch this short video here, and it explains high level what the two tools are. But basically the query tool, you put in a county route and mile point range, and you do the analysis on that segment. The import tool, you create a CSV file with a series of segments, county route and mile point ranges, comma separated, and then the tool will go gather that information and apply it, do the analysis. Now, the big difference between the two tools is that the query tool allows you to kind of walk through several steps of the analysis and really hone in on doing proper highway safety manual methodologies for safety analysis. There are things you can do to tweak it as you go through to get really good answers to your questions. Whereas the import tool, you really have to know a lot about your data to use that tool, because it's not a very good iterative tool for that. So I recommend starting with the query tool till you get familiar with what makes a good, as I'll talk about segmentation of your roadway, I'll mention how that works. So the query tools where I'm going to start, I will say that the tool itself is actually undergoing a second year of funding to actually do some improvements. So there are some things I'll try to point out that we plan to add that we're hoping for in the next year as we go. So here you start with a county dropdown, filters for prefixes. And again, I'm going to go very, very quick through this, because if you want to learn more about this, you can watch the videos or get some training otherwise. So I'm going to look more at the advanced analysis here. It defaults to the range of mile points that exist on that county and that route. So I'm actually going to look at something that I'm going to tell you is a bad idea. I'm going to look at the entire Kentucky 55 in Adair County. That's 21 miles of road, and I'm going to analyze the whole thing. And I'll show you why that's a bad idea. So step 2 just allows you to filter based on severity and different filters for emphasis areas and crash types. And then we have some information about type of road and intersections and non-intersections. Again, more detail on that in the training. I'm going to click the View Data button. It's going to churn through. So now it's looking at Adair County, Kentucky 55, 21 miles of road. That 21 miles of road goes from rural to urban, gets some, possibly has some medians in there, a lot of curvature, and it's not what we would call a homogeneous segment. So trying to analyze the route as a whole, where hopefully CDAT will get there eventually, where it can break things up into homogeneous segments, we really need the user to provide that information right now. And that's because this is, again, an iterative process that we're that we are trying to improve on. So it's a long segment, so it's taking a while to match the data. And here we go. First, HIS data. This is roadway data. So this is cabinet data. It's showing it's 2 lanes the whole way. Lane widths vary from 10 to 12 feet. Different shoulder widths. We do have a flush median in there. It's all rural. We do have some intersections and some curvature. So if you look at that as a whole, we've got 100 crashes. And you can look at the crash data on the segment. And we've got several tabs here if you would look at road and weather related crashes or whatever emphasis area you might want to look at. You can actually scroll down and compare those to similar roads, which are going to be whatever the predominant geometric makeup of the route is. That's what we're going to look at for comparison. So if we're mostly looking at 2-lane, 12-foot lanes with a 4-foot shoulder, no median, that's what we're looking at here in the bottom. And it's a quick comparison to see if you have any overrepresentation. Again, more detail on that in the videos if you're interested in that. But we want to look more at the advanced analysis. So that's where we're getting here. The most predominant highway geometrics in this segment is 2 lanes, 12-foot lanes, 4-foot shoulders, no median. Of course, it's rural. Eliminating our intersections, which is basically no curvature. And then since we're looking at a Kentucky route, it's just we're looking at all, not an interstate or parkway. You can also compare it to a certain county, different districts, and so on. But again, that's just for the comparison purposes. What we're getting at here is we need to model this segment to a specific safety performance function that matches as close as we can. Usually what we would do is use average crash rate. And in this case, we would look at a rural 2-lane road, undivided, right? That was a technique that was used for many, many years, but we didn't take into account the curvature and the roadway geometrics of the road, which we find has a big influence on the crash experience. So now we're trying to get more sophisticated with our analysis by using all these geometrics to really hone in on what we want to compare it to. What the tool is going to do is it's going to look for an SPF that matches closely to these geometrics. And what we're showing here is that 0% of the 21 miles actually matches this. Now, I know some of you are thinking, wait a second, you just said this is the most predominant geometrics of the segment. It is the most predominant, but it isn't necessarily, all these features aren't necessarily in the same location. So we may have 12-foot lanes, the most common, but those 12-foot lanes may not be the 4-foot shoulders, even though those are the most common. This is another thing that the new study is going to look at trying to improve. It's just really difficult to enumerate through all the possibilities that could happen. That's why the human can be involved here and help try to make some of those decisions for us. That's why we're getting what we're calling a segmentation score of 0% or poor. This is really important. I think if you're doing analysis and you're getting poor and you're getting 0%, it's up to you to go back to the top and fix that before continuing. I'm going to go ahead and continue just to show you what the impact of this is. So I'm going to detect SPFs. So that takes the geometrics there. Of course, it suggests a rural 2-lane road. 101 crashes. These are the parameters for the SPF. We're looking at 21 miles of road. Here you would want to look at the information of adjustment factors, click on that, and adjust this segment if it's different from the base conditions. The SPF that we've picked has a set of base conditions that may not be 12-foot lanes and 4-foot shoulders. So if that's the case, there are adjustment factors available to put in here to adjust the segment to match that base condition. That's a little more advanced highway safety manual part of this, and that's something we're really working on, trying to put guidance together for the cabinet of the best way to do that. But we have a document here that you can reference, and basically it's just saying how different is the SPF from what we've picked here, and you can adjust for that. I'm going to leave everything at 1 for now, assuming that we're similar to base conditions, and perform an advanced analysis. Here you get your typical disclaimer. It's telling you, make sure that we're looking at all crash, or make sure we're looking at crashes that match the SPF. Eventually, this tool is going to have a lot more SPFs built in for lane departure, road departure, different emphasis areas and different SPFs as we start building them. So you'll want to make sure you match the segment to the right type of SPF, the crash types too. This is showing a crash prediction of 239 crashes per our time frame, which is 5 years. So per that 21 mile segment. Then it gets into an EB estimate, which is an attempt to correct for regression in the mean bias, and that just adjusts the value here to kind of take out some of that randomness that we see in crash data. And then we go ahead and calculate what we call an EEC. And if you're not familiar with EEC, it's kind of the new critical rate factor. It's the new number that we can use to say, how does this site compare to its peers? Since we're matching this site to a rural 2-lane model, it's looking at the crash experience using a model with regression coefficients that match those types of road, and getting this EEC to say this segment right here has 121 and a half fewer crashes than expected. So that would, I don't want to use the term safe, but when you compare this to another segment of road, this is not one I would put money into, because it's not doesn't have as high of an EEC as another site. It's actually obviously very, very low. Now the problem with this is when you look at the data, it says a standard deviation, so basically a plus or minus of 14. So 121 plus or minus 14. I mean, that's, it's a fairly big range, but that also doesn't really move that 121 into anything we might be concerned about. It's still pretty heavily negative. And it's falling into a LOSS score of 2, which is there are four categories. 3 and 4 are the higher categories that you'd be more concerned with. So what's happening here is the data is saying, oh, this is totally fine. This is safe. There's nothing wrong with this segment. Although we know with a segmentation score of 0%, we're doing something wrong. This can't be right. So what you really want to do is go in here and change it to look at a specific segment of road. And I'm going to put 0 to 5 here. I happen to know that the low mile points in Adair County near the county line are pretty curvy. So I'm going to put a 2 down there to try to cut some of those out. I won't cut it all out, but it'll get a better approach. So mile marker 2 to mile marker 5. Everything gets reset anytime you change anything. So we'll run it again. So this is going to look at Adair County from mile marker 2 to mile marker 5. Same parameters otherwise. The please wait was a good time to take a drink of water. Okay, now we're looking at 2 lanes, 10-foot lanes the whole way, 4-foot shoulders the whole way, no median. A couple intersections in there, but we're actually already removing those intersections with this option here. And then a little bit of curvature, but not a whole lot. And you can get into the details of all this again. If you look at the training, you can click on the titles and get the total mileage of everything and so on. You can look at the crash experience, compare it to its peers. Well, now we're looking at 2 lanes, 10-foot, the same model. We're going to use the same model now, except now we don't have all of those crashes in here that were outside of that, outside of those parameters. Okay, so now we're only looking at about 4 crashes in this low volume section of the road. We're going to look at, we're using the same parameters, the same model, a different ADT now, because we're looking at a weighted average of ADT. So rural 2-lane models, what we're picking. Now we're looking at an EEC of negative 5.8, plus or minus about 2.9. So that's really telling you here, it's going to be anywhere from like -7 to -3 or 4, 3 or 2, something like that. So again, not something to be terribly concerned with, but not something that's, completely negative, like we saw in the first case. By using poor models, you can get some pretty bad estimates, and that if you're using it for cost benefit analysis, that really is going to make it incorrect. So we're using a segmentation score of 83%, which is great. So you can be pretty confident in your segmentation. You can be fairly confident in your indicators here. I think the curvature is playing a little bit of a role in here. that if you were able to split those out and then use the import tool to run analysis on all the segments, excluding the curves, you'd probably get a much better indicator here. And that would be the proper way, I think, to analyze this segment. So one other thing I wanted to show you is that you can modify these values. So you could go in here and say, you know what, I know it says 4 crashes, but I got on KY Ops and I found that they've actually since changed this since the data extract existed, and there are actually 6 crashes going on there. And you might say, well, wait a second, now people can just cook the books. Well, the way CDAT works is it flags that field showing that it's been changed. So unless you're an expert in Photoshop, it's going to kind of flag it. So if you print out this as a report, it's going to show that something has changed, and you can justify it with backup data too. But by doing that, you can actually rerun the analysis and base it on the new numbers. You can do the same for ADT or length or whatever have you. So that's kind of the basic functionality of this tool. I did want to go ahead and put in an example of a route in Fayette County. I'm going to look at, I believe it's US 27, so Nicholsville Road, near the county line by Fayette Mall. This was something that some folks in a consulting firm using the tool was curious about, because they ran the analysis and it wasn't giving the number that was expected. So the engineer had an intuition about the site, and it really wasn't matching, and there's kind of a good reason for it. So I'm going to put in, just to be exact here, 0.945. So this is basically the first mile of US 27 in Fayette County, again, south of Fayette Mall. I'm going to run the view data. And this is a much smaller example than that 21 mile that we looked at before. So let that run there. Okay, what I'm going to show you here, 4, 5, and 6 lanes, 11-foot, 12-foot lanes, 1-foot shoulder, 10-foot shoulder, flush median, raised mountable median, and no median, all urban, couple intersections, few intersections, no curvature. 192 crashes. You can look at the crash details there. Here's where it gets interesting. So we have some pretty different geometrics going on here. The most predominant in that mile is the no median, 4 lanes, 12-foot lanes, 1-foot shoulder. Segmentation score of 0%. Again, the areas with the median aren't necessarily the same areas with the 12-foot lanes or the 1-foot shoulders or the 4 lanes. So again, we're doing our best to pick the best homogeneous segment here, but it's changing so much that it's difficult for the tool to match it. And that's on the user to shrink down the segment to eliminate those other pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and, again, in poor fashion, go ahead and detect SPS, but you really shouldn't move past this. If you've got that poor of a score, there's really no need to do this. So it's picking an urban multi-lane undivided roadway, because undivided, the none, was a little bit more than the divided piece. It's looking at that mile segment. It's going here. I'm going to perform the analysis. What's happening here is we're getting an EEC of -21. Now, the engineer that saw this was like, wait a second. No. I know we have a problem here. I know we have a problem, and I know it's a big problem. It should be a positive EEC. And so in digging in this, we realized if you split it up, you can look at 2 pieces of it. The first half divided and the second half undivided, and the idea, or vice versa in this case. The idea is if you properly segment it, you can get a much better, more reliable score. So I'm actually going to go back to the home page and pull up the import tool. And the import tool, again, just a very, very quick introduction. If you want more on it, there are videos that you can look into in more detail. Basically, it gives you the same options to filter based on crash type, time frame, But instead of having you put in counter up mile points, it's going to have you upload your own file. So I'm going to set our file to upload here, and it's going to be my import, and it's going to be this US34 segmentation demo. And by pointing to a CSV that has the segments already put in there, we're going to look at all three scenarios side by side. So we're going to look at the segment we just looked at, 0 to 0.9, and then we're going to look at the first half, and then we're going to look at the second half. And you're going to see how we have three different analysis and how we can get a much better, more informed result by looking at this. Now, this tool can get pretty complicated. We're going to want it to calculate the ECs. That's an option if you check it, it takes it longer to run, obviously. You can have it apply adjustment factors. This would be for advanced users that know that this segment is a 13-foot lane or 14-foot lane, and you want to adjust it down to a 12, and you can put an adjustment factor in there. You've got to have a field called AF and have that in your CSV. Then the other option you have is to either auto detect the best SPF. That's what we're going to use today. So that's going to do the same thing the other tool did. Look at the most predominant geometry and find the best SPF to fit. The other option would be to specify an SPF. And if you do that, you can just pick an SPF from a list. And that would be just hitting our database and say, yeah, you use the rural 2-lane SPF and just go, regardless of what the geometry is in the database. And then for the last piece, you can actually specify an SPF ID for every one of your rows in your CSV. Again, the user would have to add a field called SPF ID and say, okay, this first row is number 1, the second's number 2, third's number 3. The auto detect is the best way to go, but it's certainly the slowest because it's got to do the matching of the HIS. So if you just wanted to get in there and run an analysis and you knew everything was a rural 2-lane, you could use the second option. But we want to have it auto detect. So I'm going to, I refreshed it with the EEC button. Anytime you change anything, it's got to refresh itself. So that way you get the proper parameters. So I'm pointing to CSV that has 3 records, 0 to 0.9, and I think that's 0 to 0.4, and then 0.4 to 0.9. And those will be our 3 options. And each one, we are checking the geometry, matching it to the most predominant, and then calculating the EC and all the rest of it there. And it's doing this all together. And obviously, if you had a list of thousands and thousands of routes, it could take quite a bit of time. And that's probably something that if you really have that big of a request, we probably should do that in-house instead of trying to use the tool to do it. Because as you can see, it can take a little while to do the matching. But there we go. We have US 27, 0 to 0.9, which is the one we looked at with that negative 21. That can't be good. And then the 0.4, 0 to 0.4 is the urban multi-lane undivided portion. And then the 0.4 to 0.9 is the urban multi-lane divided section. So you can see here how the crashes are spread out in those segments. You can see the segmentation score is 0, and then it jumps up to 80, and then 63 for the last one. And I think that 63 is just the varying geometrics of the widths going on there. But if you look at the EECs, the 21 was not what was expected. Looking at the first half, it's a negative 5.1. That's maybe expected in that undivided section. But as you walked into the divided section, we got an EEC of 66.9. That's a really high EEC, and that tracks really well with the intuition of the engineer that was something's wrong with this segment, and I'm not believing a negative 21. So that's the importance of the segmentation in this process, and that's why the tool is driven in an iterative process so that you can make these changes as you're moving forward and really take advantage of your knowledge of the roadway and your knowledge of the system. So I think this is just a good example of how it works. We're working to make this more automated. We'd love to, have everything just go in a black box and give you the answer. But then, then we wouldn't need the engineer, would we? So I'm trying to keep everyone's jobs here. So take care with what analysis you're doing and make sure that segmentation score is high, and really make sure you have good segmentation. So that is most of what I had scripted. I thought it might be of interest to see if someone had a counter route and mile point segment, something kind of small. Maybe we could pop it in the chat pod, and it's something we could look at. Maybe someone could pick something that they think is particularly dangerous, and we could just look at that quickly. So I don't know if anyone has a county route and mile point beginning and ending that they can pop in, and if not, I think we can dive into questions. But I thought it might be interesting just to see if somebody had something there.
While we're waiting for that, Eric, we'll give people a few minutes to maybe type something in there. Excellent presentation, as always. Wouldn't expect it otherwise. This is, as I mentioned earlier, a great tool. I've been very excited about having opportunities to actually use it. And what you've said is spot on. Everything we've seen, segmentation is absolutely critical. So having that segmentation score provided is such an immensely useful tool in helping to determine, are we looking at this corridor in the correct light? So kudos to the work that you guys have done on that. And we've got a few questions while we're still waiting. Maybe somebody will throw out a county route and milepost. Let's see. One of the questions has been looking at this from, let's start with a consulting partner or a consultant partner perspective, maybe haven't signed an MOU yet. How does one go about getting access to the demo data set and the evaluation tool?
So this is probably a better question for the cabinet, but I would say they could send a request to me, and I can put them in contact, or at least ask, hey, can this person have access to demo? And if someone just registers for a new user, we'll get an email. And if you don't have a signed MOU, we can contact you and maybe see if you want the demo version. So that could be
similar to that. What about someone who is an agency partner, maybe has access to crash data already? And this is specifically the question we got from Louisville Metro and Durgoan. How would they go about getting access to the CDAT tool? Would that similarly starting with you and then going to KYTC?
Yeah, I think so. And if they have their own data, I mean, we should have that data in here. We do have, and I'm actually going to get to Dirk's question here too. We do actually have local data in here. Yeah. And if the local roads have traffic volumes, everything should work the same. The trouble we're going to run into is if we don't have traffic volume. In that case, we're using traffic estimates, and that's not those aren't as good. But again, if you tweak that, you can change the numbers to something. You may have a traffic count out there, and you know the traffic volume. So if you know the volume, just go ahead and put it in, and then update the ADT from the estimate to the known volume, or even do some sensitivity analysis. Say if we assume it's a volume of 300, what's the score? Let's say that we assume the ADT is 1,000. What's the score? And you can kind of see, worst and best and worst case scenarios. Say.
Awesome. I see the first response we got was from Carol Callan Ramler, Kenton County, US 25, from milepost 12 to 12.3.
Okay. Kenton County. You said, what was the route you said?
US 25.
US 25. US 25. And that mile point again? 12?
From 12.0 to 12.3.
Take a look. Do we have an intuition if this is safe or unsafe?
I don't know. We don't use the word safe and unsafe, right?
Right. No, we don't. I caught myself before. Do we have an intuition on this site? Whoever
I'm
posted
on a limb and say it's got a high crash rate and EEC that's positive.
Okay. Well, first let's check our segmentation. There's a 3-lane segment in there, but it's pretty small. So mostly 4-lane. And really we're talking about multi-lane, so that's probably pretty trivial. 10-foot lanes, 2-foot shoulders, no median, all urban, There's an intersection in there, but we're filtering that out. There's a big curve here, and that might be what's going to drive this thing. So there's a curve there, less than 1/10 of a mile. It'd be interesting to look at this out with the curve clipped out, and then otherwise. So segmentation score is okay, and that may have to do with the 3 lanes. This is something, again, if you feel like the low segmentation score is based on something that's not going to be influencing the models, you can still proceed. Again, that's where, and I hesitate to say engineering judgment comes in, because really you've got to know your data and know your at least a little bit about the models. And I can tell you the 3 versus 4 isn't going to make a big difference here. The curve is what's got me curious. 13 crashes on a 3/10 section, ADT of 9,000. We're looking at an EEC of 1.9. So even with the curve in there, not super high. Now it does have a fairly wide standard deviation, so it's going to move, maybe as high as 5.3, which is not trivial, and especially if you're comparing it to other segments, that could be one of your higher ones in the county or the district. Now, we'll point out here, it's important to note the sites we were looking at before had big volumes, and because of that, the ECs tend to have a higher magnitude. And to combat that, because if you're trying to compare rural 2 lanes to urban facilities, they're generally just going to have higher EECs, and there's logic behind it, kind of like what Tony said. Where there are cars, there are crashes. So yes, the EECs will be higher. The fixes are going to be more expensive, countermeasures. So one thing you can look at is your LOSS, and this one's actually a 3. So you might have a much higher EEC on an urban facility, and I think we saw one with an LOS score of 2. So this one might bubble to the top if you're gonna prioritize your rural 2-lane roads. And this is actually urban, right? Urban 2-lane road. This might be in the higher side of things. So this is where it gets a little nuanced. And again, you gotta get into the engineering judgment to know. But you've got a lot of parameters here you can use to kind of compare. You've got a somewhat lowish EEC, but a high LOSS. So it'd be tough to look at this and not compare it to others. But I'd say you might have a candidate here for a high crash location.
All right, awesome. Okay, let's see. Let's skip down. Kevin Bailey, he's got Shelby County, Kentucky 1848.
Well.
And I've just opened the CDAT tool myself, and I'm gonna check a couple of these while you're doing this one.
That would be great, because yeah, are we 4:50 stop or 5 o'clock?
We're really 4:50. We can hang on here for a little bit longer. Since there are no sessions at 5 o'clock, we don't really have a hard stop time.
Well, why don't I look at, so the route is again, I'm sorry?
Kentucky 1848.
18. So we'll do this one, and if you get any, you can share it with us, Brian, but I'll look through any other questions. 1848.
And it's from 8.4 to 8.6. And I'm running, Dirk Gowen asked about County Route 1001C in Jefferson County, and I'm running that one right now.
All right, we'll give this a look. And it is interesting because your intuition can be off too. You might be like, yeah, that's, or especially if it's a road you live on or something, which obviously this tool is not used for personal analysis, but you may have a false intuition about a road just because you drive it a lot. And that can influence it. But
Kevin, got any speculation on what this one's going to look like?
That's the best part, when someone says, yes, it's going to be EEC of 50 and it's 0.2 because it happens. So 8.4 to 8.6. Were there any questions actually in the know we tackled some of them.
Yeah, we've answered the one about the local roads are only state maintained. The other questions were mostly about how to access the tool or to get access to the evaluation version.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm getting a poor segmentation score for that Jefferson County project, Dirk. It's actually showing only about 28% on the score.
What's your EEC then? Why don't we finish that one first, and then I'll show this one.
Okay, let's see. Let's run that.
And what Brian's pointing out is the tool's so easy to use, even he can do it.
Even Brian can do it. It's actually showing now, again, poor segmentation score, and I just focused on the quick turnaround here, non-intersections only, and this is showing an LOSS of 3 with an EEC of 48.4 for a 5-year period.
Yeah,
so that's pretty high.
And
again, we want to go back in and look at smaller segmentation of that, of course,
or look at your segmentation.
Yeah.
Makeup and see if it's a number of lanes or something that doesn't have a huge influence. That can be okay, and it's a guide. It's an iterative process. So you do want to kind of pay attention. This one looks pretty good, very homogeneous. I wonder if the person picked that on purpose. 91%, and of course you get that if you get into rural areas. And Brian, do you know this section? You're Shelby County, right?
I do, very well.
Okay. So we're looking at 17 crashes, small segment, it's ADT. What did that say? 20. I have a tendency to scroll the mouse after I click the button, and that jumps me to the top. So you don't need to do that. I just do it out of habit. 2100 ADT. Yeah, an EEC of 13 and an LOS score of 4. Whoever picked this had some inside knowledge, I suspect. But no, this one maps onto the intuition, I suspect, and yeah, and would be I would say a high candidate, especially if you looked at the EECs of all your roads in that county or district. So
yeah, and I'm actually pulling up. Jeff Dick asked about Russell County US 127. From 16.5 to 18.2, so I'm running that one right now. Again, I'm going quickly here, so gotta watch my filters. I'm going to do intersections and non-intersections on this one. View data. And while we're waiting on that, I will just mention for everyone, much like the other sessions, today's session has been recorded and will be made available to anyone via a link at some point after today. All right, so I got a segmentation score for the Russell County portion. Again, also poor, 28%. Looks like we've got some, trying to see what the issue there is. Shoulder width ranges from 3 to 10 feet. Lane widths are 11 to 12 feet. So probably combination of, I'm assuming mostly the shoulder width is what the issue is there. But if I just using that poor score, let's run the tool. While we're waiting on that, anyone else have any other questions they'd like to ask before we wrap up? I got, let's see, it's still running.
Yeah, you're farther away from UK, so it's a little slower for you.
All right, I got also level service safety 4 and EEC of 126 for a 5-year period. So that's great. Another one, that low segmentation score. We'd want to go back in and look at that, break it down into some further smaller sections.
Jeffrey says, if you have access to KOI Ops, we'd be able to get to this database. If you have access to KOI Ops, the secure version, then that means you have a tier 3 level access. And that means you should have a signed MOU, and you certainly you would actually get the advanced access to this tool. Yeah, then again, just register for account. I'll double check with the cabinet that you are who you say you are, and then and you shouldn't have a problem. Assuming I'm not speaking out of turn. That should be the case. And again, we have a basic version that doesn't have the PDF narratives, all that stuff. That if you only have a tier 1 level access, you can have basic. So I guess the webinar is going to shut on us. So my contact info is in the handout. If you download that, and you can reach me there. Tony's contact info is shown on the screen, so happy to. And I see Reg taking pot shots at us. He's always getting into the academic side of these things, and he's right. But I don't want to confuse things too much.
Well, once again, gentlemen, thank you for the excellent presentation. And again, it's being recorded. It'll be available if you want to disseminate to your staff, anyone that wasn't able to attend this afternoon. Again, on behalf of KYTC, FHWA, ACEC Kentucky, thank you for attending the final session of the planning/general track. So hope everyone has a great evening. Take care.
Take care, everyone.